Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Bryce Carter. I'm the Conservation Programs Manager with the Colorado Sierra Club. As was just mentioned, tomorrow is actually my last day. After 6.5 years with the Sierra Club, I'm going to be transitioning into likely consultancy work. But it's been an amazing journey, and tonight I am excited to kind of share the story of what's been happening in Colorado and across the country and across the world in terms of this movement away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And I really appreciate all of you taking the time out this evening to come learn about this, find out how you can get involved, and to actually create change. Because this movement is real, it's tangible, it's happening on the local level, it's building up momentum to get influence on the state level, and yes, even the federal level. Maybe not right now, but down the road. And so the Sierra Club has its Ready for 100 campaign, and what you're going to hear is a movement of many organizations and many individuals, many technical fields that are all working on this same problem. How the heck do we transition to renewable energy economy? And I'm not going to honestly speak much because we have some amazing experts that have been on the ground doing this work for a long time. So I'm going to turn it over to them in a second, but Colorado, I can say, is one of the leading states in terms of this movement, and Jefferson County, I think there's huge potential here. It's not, it's pretty cool. You guys have NREL in your backyard. I mean, that's not something a lot of communities can say. So with that, I wanted to just introduce what this is all about with a quick video, and then I'm going to be turning over to a few of our speakers to talk and present what they do and give different stories about how, especially in Colorado, this movement has really taken off in recent years. We're going to hear from NREL themselves. We're going to hear a little bit about what has happened in Boulder, and then also what's gone on in Pueblo that really has elevated the conversation in terms of the statewide level. So I'm going to restart this video for us. And then I'm going to switch over to the speakers, and then after that we'll have a little bit of a dialogue on stage, answer a few questions, but really what tonight's about is after this dialogue we're going to go out in the commons, and we would love to meet all of you and have ongoing discussions about what this work looks like here in Jefferson County, going county by county, city by city, how we can grow.
The ability to cut air pollution, we have the ability to lower energy rates, we have the ability to stop climate change.
We worked with the City of Fort Collins over the last number of years. They had some very ambitious goals. They came to us to say, is this actually possible? Is this feasible? Can we make this work? Can we make the finances work to actually go carbon neutral? Not only was it possible, they could go farther faster than they first thought. The first thing is you need commitment from local city leaders. You have to have that commitment in place. You have to have the drive, the ambition to make it happen. That's what this campaign is all about.
Boulder is 100% committed to, we're 100% committed to 100% renewable energy by 2030.
We should declare that Pueblo will be a 100% renewable energy city, just like the other cities.
Denver announced a commitment for an 80% reduction in all of our greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors by 2050. We look forward to getting a lot of input on how we reach that goal, in particular around clean energy.
After that, you need to do some analysis.
We're able to provide technical assistance, analysis, tools to help cities figure out what's the best way to most quickly move towards 100% renewables. And we help to do that with Aspen.
You have to have buy-in from a wide range of stakeholders.
This has to be a just transition, and it's not enough for just the wealthy to afford solar on their houses, and it's not enough for just folks who are well connected to have clean energy jobs. We've got to figure out how to do this by and for everyone.
That's why the Sierra Club is so proud and excited to sponsor the Ready for 100 campaign. For we're working to ensure a just and equitable transition to 100% clean energy in every town, city, and community across our great states.
Thank you. So that's just a little bit about what this movement is about. And as you saw with those stages, the first step is getting a commitment. And in Colorado, we now have, from Sierra Club standpoint, over 8 communities committed. So we've had Breckenridge and Summit County recently this year. We also had, as recently as yesterday, the mayor of Denver signed an agreement with XCEL Energy to find out what their pathways to 100% look like. And what we see with this movement is that there are many pathways forward, and whether it's working with the utility or not working with your utility, going on your own, I think there are many opportunities to do right for our communities, keep energy dollars local, create jobs, clean our air, clean our water, and save our climate. So with that, I won't preach anymore, but we have a really exciting panel tonight. So I would love to invite Joyce McLaren with the National Renewable Energy Lab up to the stage and turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me here tonight, Bryce. My name is Joyce McLaren. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'm not the only one from NREL here tonight. We have Allison Holm here, who I work with on a regular basis and who works in the state and local tribal area, so please interrogate her as well tonight. And I see Keith here, so we have lots of NREL genes around. But I work in the Strategic Energy Analysis Office at NREL in the Market and Policy Group, and that group covers a lot of different topics. I work mostly right now in the solar field. So some of my past work has been providing technical assistance to, for instance, cities that have questions as they try to reach their renewables goals. One of them was the city of Aspen. I led the effort that helped them get to 100% renewable. You may or may not have heard about that. And I do have some documentation in the main lobby if you're interested in learning more about that effort. I also am currently working on a new initiative that is where we're involved in helping quite a number of very large cities with their goals. And it's brand new, it's just starting out, but we're working with cities like Orlando and Salt Lake City and San Diego, so really big cities, and doing some very exciting modeling and analysis to support them. So stay tuned on that. So I'm not going to go into a lot of data and technical talk here, so I'm a little bit out of my element in that sense because I do like talking about data, but I think tonight will just be more general. And I'll start off by just giving you NREL at a glance. We have, in case you aren't familiar with NREL, we have 1,700 employees and even more folks that are involved through postdoc internship kind of responsibilities or visiting professors, things like that. So it's a big organization. We partner with industry, we partner with nonprofits such as Sierra, we partner with academia, pretty much anyone, and really work in a wide variety of different areas. We do not only renewable electricity, but also have a lot of activities in the transportation area, in the energy efficiency realm, and in buildings and systems integration. Systems integration being grid modernization and integration of variable resources into the larger electricity system. So we are very excited that NREL is part of this new energy transformation and hopefully partially responsible for some of the progress that's been made. Certainly the costs of renewables have been falling recently, and we've seen really great strides in cost reductions for a lot of different technologies, wind, solar, energy efficiency technologies, you name it. And this has been driving economic development, as our politicians are very keen to point out, which is really fantastic. And there's been a lot of progress in the amount of energy that we supply through renewable technologies. in the past few years, we've really seen incredible amounts of solar go in, both utility scale and distributed scale solar. And we're up to about 15-16% of our total energy use, our total electricity use from renewables at this point. And of course, we're very excited to see a lot of cities and counties and others announcing their 100% renewable energy goals. But the question I get very, very often as a person who's kind of connected to the technical parts of the effort is it really possible? Can we really do this? Our mayor just announced 100%, but can we really do that? Is it possible? And so that's a little bit of what I wanted to touch on, and what Bryce asked me to touch on tonight was whether it's possible. Well, NREL has a study that I encourage you to go online if you want to geek out on a lot of great data, and look at it further. But it's called the Renewable Energy Futures Study, and it is a data-driven exploration of the very high renewable energy futures. So looking at what happens when we try to integrate 50, 60, 70, 80% of renewable energy onto our electricity grid nationwide. So basically, just to get right to the conclusion, is that yes, renewable electricity technologies that are available today can supply 80%, maybe even more, of the total U.S. electricity generation by 2050, while meeting the electricity demand on an hourly basis in every region of the country. So this is a major result that came from the Energy Futures Study. This language, I think, was taken straight off of our website, the Energy Futures website. The photograph, the picture of the data below is just showing a week in July that the model is showing how the model was balancing the different energy generation resources over the day to supply the total load. And you'll see there that there's some baseload nuclear, there's baseload geothermal, baseload hydro. So it's not, and there's gas, natural gas generation in there too. So this scenario is not 100% renewable, but it's getting there. But of course, it's challenging. It's not all that easy. And it's not surprising when we hear utility companies kind of balk or clam up when somebody talks about 100% renewable. There are major challenges to doing this. Not unsurmountable challenges, but major challenges. In particular, the variability of renewable generation, the variability of solar and wind in particular can cause some challenges to grid operations. It can cause voltage control problems. I won't go into details, but frequency regulation can become an issue, but especially voltage control can really become challenging, and just balancing the supply and demand every single second of the day is necessary to maintain grid stability every second of the day, all the time. And if the load is not balanced with that generation every single second, to some degree, within some margin of error, then you'll get a blackout. So it's easy to talk about, oh, we want to go 100% renewable, but then implementing that can be very, very difficult. And utility companies are responsible for maintaining the reliability of the grid. People aren't going to be happy if you have many, many blackouts just happening all over the place, and they become a normal occasion, which they don't now, amazingly. But this is a real problem. There are, however, solutions, and NREL is really working very hard on the systems integration side, on the grid modernization side, and trying to understand how do we balance these variable resources every second of the day. The answer really just boils down to system flexibility, increasing the flexibility of the grid and the electricity system in general. And we do that through a number of different means. Improving our forecasting of wind and solar it is important and goes a long way to increasing our ability to balance correctly. Using dispatchable resources, those would be geothermal, hydro, biomass, as base loads, and to balance when there's a lot of variability in wind and solar. Using energy storage, of course. We're seeing the price of lithium-ion battery storage really coming down very, very quickly, and a lot of interest in energy storage, both for the reliability of the grid and the balancing issues, but then also for resiliency measures in response to natural disasters, for instance. We can also employ a lot of different advanced distribution system controls. So voltage regulators, and smart inverter functionalities, things like that. And we're making a lot of headway in understanding how we can use these advanced controls and technologies in order to support our grid. And then, of course, responsive loads. That's on the customer side. The demand response opportunities are really very real. We're learning a lot about smart charging of electric vehicles, and how electric vehicles can sort of act as a sponge to soak up excess solar generation in the middle of the day. Water heaters, electric water heaters, things like that. So there are solutions. So really, in conclusion, there's a lot of different ways to get to where we want to go. There's not just one pathway to do this. There's not one answer. And there's a lot of different options that we have on the table right now. Not only that, but we don't even have all of the options. We're quite certain. We continue to innovate. There continue to be discoveries, and we are quite confident that we can get there. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think that there's a lot of confidence out there that we can solve these problems. Did anybody see the moon when they were coming here? It was really amazing, and the thought that popped into my head when I saw that was, if we can get to that moon, if we can stand on that moon, we can do this. We can do this. So. There's a lot of reasons to do it. I don't think to this audience I really have to present all the reasons, but this again is a quote from the Renewable Energy Futures study, that the high renewable energy futures can result in deep reductions in electric sector greenhouse gas emissions and water use. And the costs really are not exorbitant. The costs are within the same range of other ways of getting to greenhouse gas reductions. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer questions later, or just come and find me. I brought a few materials if you want to take some old-fashioned paper reading home for bedtime reading. Thanks.
The Sierra Club has been working on having a technical advisory team to support connections between community leaders and NREL and other agencies to figure out how do these pathways apply to communities all across Colorado and beyond. Obviously, there's to get to that point, we need to make sure that there's leadership and a demand from the public on the ground. As many of you know, there's a growing movement to address climate change after the Paris Accords especially. I think a lot of folks are very passionate and saying we need to do something, we need to act, especially in the local level, since the federal level they're not going to act. And so, what we've seen with this movement is leaders, volunteer leaders, even cities taking leadership to say, you know what, we're going to take a stand and we're going to figure this out for ourselves, and we're going to be a leader and teach others how to do this. And there are tremendous volunteers that have stepped up. Part of tonight is the Jefferson County Ready for 100 campaign, the Ready for Renewables. So it's helping volunteer leaders in multiple cities in this county saying, we want to stand up and work with our leadership to move the needle and make sure that these commitments happen so that we can move our utilities and move ultimately what our grid looks like. I'll introduce Don a little bit later when we get on stage for extended dialogue, but Don Sorensen here, for instance, is one of the leads with the Jefferson County level of the 100% movement. So it's really exciting to see, and I know there's a bunch of you in the audience that are folks that are leading and taking charge, and it's with that, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Leslie Glustrom, who has been an amazing leader. She was actually, it's funny, we're kind of going full circle. It was my very first event with Sierra Club. 6.5 years ago, my very first person I approached was this lady right here, and it was a big experience. So please, big round of applause, Leslie Glustrom.
Good evening. Thank you so much. It's awesome that you're all here. And I just out of curiosity, how many people here are already part of a Ready for 100 campaign? Woo! Let's give them a round of applause. And how many, it's a little hard with these lights to see you actually, but how many would think they might want to be part of one? Very good. So now that's very good. So this is Don and that's Bryce. And let's raise your hands high if you're already part of a Ready for 100. You already did it, but do it this time. Maybe raise them a little higher so people can see you, so they know who to come talk to get started. Because as I was getting ready for this evening, I was thinking, you know, I've done a lot, I'm not young, I've done a lot of things in my life, I've had a lot of fun, I've been involved in a lot of really amazing efforts. But I will say that the work that we've done on this clean energy, climate change effort has been absolutely, I mean, short of having kids and getting married and all that stuff, but in my work life, this has been the best thing ever. You just make all these friends. Kind of got to keep your friends. You don't want to aggravate people, but it's been amazing. And Duncan Gilchrist, who's going to follow me for a few minutes, and because he's one of our rising stars in Boulder, is handing out some excellent news that we'll go over. But and you know, I just wanted to briefly say in response to Joyce, who I'm a huge fan of hers, and of course of NRELs, all sources of generation are intermittent. I was down next to the Comanche 3 coal plant. This is quite a few years ago now, when it was coming up and there was a big argument over the noise that it was creating. I was as close to that coal plant as you can be without trespassing, because I wanted to see what the noise was like. And as I stood there at the fence and looked at the coal plant, it started to go, and within 3 minutes it was down. So it was basically an 800 megawatt generation source kaput. So yes, wind and solar are intermittent, but so is coal and natural gas. So, you know, don't let them get you too much. So the title of this section that I wanted to go through is Setting Renewable Energy Goals and Meeting Them. Because obviously we actually have to solve this problem. We can't just sort of like, it's kind of like losing weight, you know. It's like one thing to say you're going to lose some weight or save money or whatever your thing is. And it's another thing to actually do it. And we believe that we actually have to do it. So I wanted to condense close to 20 years worth of history into about 4 minutes, so that we'll have time to go over this really great news that Duncan's handing out. So in Boulder, we said, yep, we need to do it. We did a greenhouse gas inventory. The red line is the Kyoto Protocol. In 2001, I think it was, Boulder said, we're going to meet the Kyoto target. So I decided to condense this, as I say, almost 20 years of history, because we spent quite a bit of time before 2000 talking about all this. Finally, we said we're going to do the Kyoto target because our then President Bush said, you know, I don't really think we're going to do it. And we said we're going to try to meet the Kyoto target. And you can see for the next 6 years, our greenhouse gas emissions went up. Oops. So it's not quite good enough to just say you're going to do it. Phase 2, in 2006, we passed a climate tax, taxed ourselves based on our electricity and natural gas use. We collected a bunch of money and we started to do some really amazing efficiency programs and a lot of other climate programs. It's basically an hour talk in itself. We just did a whole lot of stuff. And you can see we actually pretty much bent the curve. They no longer kept going up. But while we were doing that, XCEL was busy building that big coal plant down in Pueblo and increasing the carbon intensity of their electricity. So when you actually look at what we did with efficiency, we did that, but XCEL did this with the carbon intensity of our electricity. We still got a bit of a down bend in the curve, but not so much. And then we did this really, really radical thing. We put a text box on this greenhouse gas inventory. Up to this point, you just kind of looked at that. Okay, we got all these things that contribute greenhouse gases. Those of us that have been thinking a long time about this said, let's make it clear what's the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions? And now it's very obvious to you that the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions is electricity. That was our big radical move, is putting that big text box on there. I often describe this as when you go to the grocery store and you're buying your broccoli or your beer or your milk or whatever it is, the electricity that's keeping those things cold, I often use broccoli because I'm a mom and all that, but it's been, and it still is to this day, about 70% fossil fuels, about 50% coal, about 20% natural gas. It's not okay with me that my broccoli and and lots of us have solar and people like Steve have done amazing things, but when you go to your grocery store, your fitness center, your bank, or your whatever it is, your community's electricity is coming largely from fossil fuels to this day. And that's what's not okay, and that's why the Ready for 100 campaign is so great. Well, I hope so many of you will make sure you get in touch with Don so we can kind of make sure everybody gets organized. Then we moved into phase 3, because once we realized it was our electricity, we realized we needed to decarbonize it. Many of you know that Boulder's been involved in a very, frankly, extended and difficult struggle with XCEL. And the bottom line is we've said, if you keep burning coal and natural gas, we're going to divorce you. That divorce process is referred to as creating a locally controlled, independent, municipal electric utility like they have in Fort Collins and Longmont and Loveland and Lyons and Colorado Springs and 20-odd communities around Colorado. And it was basically a divorce proclamation, which goes by the name municipalization. That has been the one thing that's given us strong leverage with XCEL. With all due respect to Denver, which just signed the MOU with XCEL a day or so ago, that's okay. Those MOUs tend to be really good for XCEL and not very good for your community if you actually read them carefully. This one's very much non-binding, doesn't have much teeth in it, kind of can destroy the momentum you've built in your community. And we were offered many agreements with XCEL, and we're like, no, we don't want words on paper. That's not good enough for us. We want real commitment. We want real progress. Our community has turned down agreement after agreement after agreement. It's kind of like saying, okay, I'll stop drinking, because your marriage is falling apart because you've been drinking too much. But you say, I'll stop drinking, but then you keep drinking. So XCEL writes these papers, but they keep the coal trains keep running back and forth. And Boulder has said that's not good enough. So we continue to do this. It's given us some good traction. We're also continue to do our climate programs. Duncan Gilchrist will speak briefly about those. And we have had some leverage with XCEL. They have said, as long as you pay off all the old coal plants and give us our full level of profit at it, and let us own a whole bunch of the renewables and get full level of profit on that, then we'll go from where we are now at 20-odd% renewables to 55% renewables. It's an open secret that when I opened up this document from XCEL, I just started weeping because we've been working so hard to push them. There's a lot of strings on this that are not very good, but the concept of a large utility going above 50% is very good. And while it takes everyone working on it, and Pueblo and everybody else, because everybody's created the environment that's told XCEL, you've got to do this or you're not just going to lose Boulder, you're going to lose a lot of communities. We did all these elections. Every one of these elections was a wicked amount of work. I think they all took several years off of all of our lives, and you can do the math because that's a lot of elections, so we've lost a lot of years of our lives because they're really hard work. Duncan was here for the last one, and I think he gets that it was a lot of work. And I want to just briefly mention there's a group in Boulder that's working on competition. This map, if a state has something, it either has a regional transmission organization or some form of competition. You'll see that Colorado doesn't have any. As we get to this sheet, I think you'll come to understand why that might have been useful. So now Duncan was kind enough to pass this sheet out. I want to make sure that some of you have seen this already. But this is absolutely fabulous news, and I want to make sure, before I turn it over to Duncan, that people kind of understand this sheet. Let's start down at the bottom. This is like amazing good news. We often like to work with the actual data so people see. If we start down at the bottom, you can see that this came from XCEL Energy, their 2016 electric resource plan. The docket number is there. People who know me know I'm always talking about docket numbers. The report came out on December 28th, 2017, so just a couple months ago. And now we're going to look back up at the top. These are the responses to XCEL's request for proposals. And above the line are natural gas and standalone storage. The units on that are different than below the line, so you can't compare the numbers above the line to the numbers below. It would be great if everybody could nod their head if you understand that you can't compare the prices above the line to the prices below. Could you nod your head if you kind of just heard what I said? Because when you take this out and show this to your friends, that's one of the first questions they ask. We're not going to pay so much attention to the natural gas. Duncan and I will be in the back. We can answer questions later. I just want to point out a couple things to you quickly. We're going to look at the column that says project megawatts. It's a little bit towards the right. We can see for wind, there were 42 projects submitted. They totaled 17,380 megawatts. Nod your head if you're kind of seeing where I am. Okay, XCEL system, the system that keeps the lights on. I know this church has solar, but otherwise what keeps the light on is about 7,500 megawatts with a 1,000 megawatt reserve margin. So they just got bids for 17,000 megawatts of wind. And when we look at the price, it's $18.10 a megawatt hour. If you were to do the math and convert that to cents per kilowatt hour, you would divide by 10. So the median price, meaning 50% of those projects are lower, is 1.8 cents a kilowatt hour. That's exactly the right response. I didn't have anything to do with it, but I'm just telling you about it. But there are things you can do about it. We're going to look at a few more of these. There are a few extra costs. These are being refreshed because of the Tax Act, and that has complex tax considerations. These numbers will change a bit, but it won't change the basic concept, which is that we're drowning in wind, solar, and storage. Thank you, NREL. And it's all fabulously well priced. Well, let's just look at a couple more. Let's look at solar, which is down for 13,435 megawatts of projects. The bids, you might have a project and you might bid it in 2 or 3 different ways if you were a developer. So we don't use bid megawatts because that's not quite an accurate representation. We're going to use project megawatts. Solar project megawatts, there were 75 projects, 13,435 megawatts. Everybody see where we are? Cool. And what was the median price on those solar projects? Just yell it out. Yeah, $29.50 a megawatt hour, 2.95 cents a kilowatt hour. Thank NREL again for doing all the work that's driven these technology costs down. So we've got thousands of megawatts of solar under 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Remember, these are median prices. The lowest price contracts are going to go for a lot less than this, or some amount less. We don't know. We don't get all the details. The last thing I want to, a couple of things. Solar with battery storage. 10,800 megawatts at $36 a megawatt hour, 3.6 cents a kilowatt hour. This is the lowest we've ever seen, as far as I know, in the country, and it's been kind of reported around the country as the lowest. So with 10,000 megawatts of solar with storage at 3.6 cents a kilowatt hour. Wow. If there's 58, you come down and see the bottom line, there's 58,000 total megawatts. Above the line is less than 8,000 megawatts. So we have received in Colorado in the last 2 months over 50,000 megawatts of wind, solar, and storage. And most of it is below 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Is this problem solvable? Yeah, this problem is really, really solvable. XCEL is planning to take about this much wind and this much solar. All the purple bars have storage. If they do what they currently plan to do, they will leave over 90% of these bids on the table. Does that seem like a good idea to you? No, that does not seem like a good idea. But they've spent about $2 billion on fossil fuel plants in the last decade. It's like a kid eating 3 pieces of chocolate cake before dinner. Who's got room for the peas or the broccoli or whatever? Because you just gorged out on fossil fuel plants. So we need help getting more of these out of, electronic files and into the ground. If you see us afterwards, you'll see these little blue sheets of paper. We believe that the right target is the board of directors at xcelenergy.com. And there's little talking points there. At this point, you probably know what to say. I want to turn it over very briefly to Duncan Gilchrist, who's been kind enough to come down, because he's sort of helping move our community to the next level. Yeah, maybe he'll use that if that would be okay. And I just want to speak to you for a few minutes, because as you do this work, I was thinking as I was getting ready, it's a little bit like a marriage when you get hooked up with all these other people who kind of want to go in the same direction towards more clean energy. It can be really amazing, and marriages can also be, frankly, really unhappy. And so you kind of have to be sure you think about the attitude you bring to this effort that we're all trying to achieve, because this is the defining issue of our time, and the only planet we know of that supports life. The climate is threatened, and that means everything is threatened. And I want to just let you listen to Duncan, because I think you'll enjoy.
Thanks. And thanks, Leslie, for that. So yeah, what you see on the screen here are the 4 goals that are associated with Boulder's climate commitment, right? And so these were passed a few years ago after the community had been working towards decarbonizing in a lot of different ways for a long time. So this is not when the work started. But so now we're here at a point in 2018 in Boulder, and it's pretty apparent to our community that if we're going to actually make these things a reality, it's going to require average citizens to take on a great deal of responsibility and come together in groups to collectively problem solve, right? To bring down the barriers on the way to make 100% renewable electricity a reality. So we benefit from kind of a crowded playing field of climate action organizations in Boulder, which is a great thing, but there's a lot of kind of coalitional work that happens, and I've actually had the privilege to spearhead an organization that's recently started up called Boulder Climate Corps. Our organization's mission statement is to catalyze the adoption of clean energy technologies by turning ideas into action. Our niche within the ecosystem is kind of the turning ideas into action part, right? We have a lot of brilliant people in this area and a lot of great ideas, and sometimes it just takes a group that's willing to put the feet on the ground to just go the extra mile to implement the ideas into action. So, and I'm sure the kind of barriers that you folks have faced and will face kind of differ slightly from the barriers that we face in Boulder. Everyone has a different kind of set of circumstances that they're working within. One thing, however, that I think is the same no matter what Ready for 100 campaign you're working on, wherever you are, is the importance of teamwork. Obviously, this is something we all know, right? Like the intergroup dynamic between any organization can help an organization advance towards the success of their goals, or kind of sink. And it's something we know, but it's not something that we necessarily always prioritize. So I'm just going to click the next slide here. So here is an incredible organization, right? Highly functional organization. My question to you all is, how can we be more like these ants? Like I said in the beginning, in order to actually reach our goals, it's going to require average citizens to bear a heavy load, like these ants, right? So, in my mind, that has to do with just bringing your best self to the table when we come and convene. Like Leslie said, a lot of the folks that you work with, you didn't grow up with them, you didn't kind of get psychologically conditioned with them during childhood, right? These are strangers that we're coming together to work with, but really the success of a lot of organizations has to do with functioning like these ants do. We're going to face barriers, we're going to face periods of stagnation, we might drop a seed every once in a while, but if we're going to get to 100% renewable energy, I think the climate crisis is as urgent as it could be, and so we really have to bring our best selves to the table when we're coming together. So that's just a message I'll leave you folks with.
Excellent. We're going to keep rolling here to respect everyone's time, and I would love to invite David Cockrell from Pueblo up here. I guess I'll just say I had the pleasure of meeting David a couple years ago in Pueblo, and the story of Pueblo is really inspiring about where we started from, how it's grown, and especially really the story of the people there and what it means when we think about equity, inclusion, and justice, and how these issues and how we work together, what does this mean on the ground? And so without further ado, let me push the magic button and pass it on to you.
Great. Hello, thank you. Well, yes, so I'm from Pueblo. I'm a retired college administrator and urban planner, and have been involved with the Sangre de Cristo group of the Sierra Club in Pueblo, and now doing a lot of work with the chapter. And I'm also a member of a ragtag little coalition of characters in town called Pueblo's Energy Future that has deliberately not formed any organizational structure, but really attempts to influence policy at the state level, at the PUC, and certainly with our own lovely investor-owned utility, Black Hills Energy. And so those are my primary affiliations. So Pueblo is a community of 110,000, 100 miles down the road. It's often regarded as an environmental justice community. 28% population below the federal poverty level. And we were chosen as one of the 10 first pilot communities for the National Ready for 100 campaign by the Forward Fund of the Sierra Club Foundation. So we were kind of guinea pigs out there. And we started this program in early 2016 and achieved our resolution passed by the Pueblo City Council February, I think it was the 13th of 2017, so last year. So we're about a year beyond that point. Now, one thing I got to tell you is these days, one of our current initiatives right now is to divorce our city from our investor-owned utility. So we look to Boulder a lot for the roadmap for how you move forward with this, for better or for worse. And one of the big lines around town these days is, "We are not Boulder." And I think in a lot of ways we are Boulder, just minus the money and minus about half the education. And Leslie and I have worked pretty closely together over the last year or so. She's definitely a mentor for me, and they have shown us the way in a lot of ways. In fact, just today I heard that some of our senior local government staff had a very productive meeting with the city staff in Boulder, about the stages in the process of taking the off-ramp from a franchise agreement. Anyway, what I want to do tonight, what I've chosen to do tonight for the next 10 minutes is to take a kind of a tactical bent here. So I'm going to assume that you're in this audience because you're at least dancing with the idea of being involved in an effort to convince either the city council of your municipality or perhaps the Jefferson County Commissioners to actually pass a resolution declaring their intent to be powered 100% by renewable energy by such and such a date. And so I'm going to assume that you're at least dancing with that involvement for yourself. And some of you may be well past that. You may have already made a firm commitment, either as a group or individually, to be involved in that campaign. But now, when I first got involved in this seemed like a monumental undertaking to try to convince a body of elected officials to go for something as pie in the sky and as visionary as 100% renewable energy. So what I want to do here for the next few minutes is just talk to you about the way we messaged our council and our community leaders in order to get to this point. So what I'm going to show you really is the PowerPoint presentation that was the mainstay of our primary work session with the Pueblo City Council early December 2016. So you can see the actual slides and the actual message that we presented to them. Now, I'm not going to talk, just like Joyce, I'm not going to go into a lot of the details either about the economics or about the technology. That's for another day. But what I want to do is show you what these messages were and talk to you a little bit about how we chose them and how they were received. So obviously we began this little exercise to setting the stage by talking to them about the future of Pueblo's energy. And there was already a lot of energy in the community around energy justice problems, around the disconnect and reconnection policies, the arrearage management policies that Black Hills Energy has established especially for our low-income residents. So there's a lot of concern already. So we tagged into that. People were ready for change in some way, but not 100% renewable energy. So we borrowed this slide from a CRES presentation in Boulder County in 2016, Chris Nelder, and I love this graphic. And this was essentially to communicate to the council, hey, there is a revolution happening in this industry. And it's much like the telecom revolution that happened. And there will be change. And the change has already started. Those are the early messages to sort of set the tone for them that they will be part of these changes no matter what they decide to do. And we began to show them some data. This data I've updated, and this is from the Lawrence Berkeley Lab Market Report for 2017, which essentially corroborates what Leslie was talking about with the recent XCEL bids, that wind prices, especially in the Midwest and in the Great Plains, are coming in at 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and now even a little below that. Oh, well, thank you, ma'am. This is a Boulder laser pen, which really doesn't work any better than the Pueblo laser pen. So we are kindred spirits. It works fine on the wall. But, sorry, little joke there. Oh, I know. All right, so wind prices, whoa. So wind prices in 2015-16 coming in at 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And so solar prices at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And the size of this bubble chart, by the way, the size of the bubbles reflects the size of the installation, the size of the solar farm or the wind farm. So this, and then in our presentation, in our work with these council members, we did compare that with natural gas prices and talked about that. We also talked about how storage is starting to come online. There were questions from the get-go because we had met with every city council member individually twice before we got in front of them in a work session, in a formal work session. So they all had concerns about, well, how are we going to make this happen? What's the roadmap to 100%? And I'm, meanwhile, calling Joyce and saying, what's the roadmap? How can we make this happen? And there are missing pieces in that roadmap still. But some of them, obviously storage is a key component, and so the technological changes and the economic changes that have happened in storage in the last couple of years have really started to make this look like it might actually be feasible. The next angle that we took, and this is one you might want to consider, was we said, well, we're not a big supporter of our investor-owned utility, and we know you aren't either, but even our investor-owned utility gets this. Even our IOU has done the economic analyses behind their electric resource plan submittal. At that point, it was just being approved by the PUC. And they have identified the advantages of transitioning to renewables. Now, this is dramatic because the business plan that Black Hills has used in Pueblo has been to build a huge amount of new gas plants. We've got 3 new gas plants that were constructed so that they could build their rate of return on the investment in capital infrastructure. That's the way the IOUs make money. But even in their electric resource plan, they projected 3 new large wind farms, one in 2020, one in 2028, one in 2038, that would bring them to 55% renewable energy by 2038. So we were able to use this point to to demonstrate to the city council that we're not just a bunch of wacko environmentalists, that the analyses that we are doing are consistent with those of the utility. And so this is a part of a movement that we can build on as a community, and you as city council members can demonstrate leadership in showing a vision for the community through this process. This, by the way, was just simply some quotes from the electric resource plan. Wind resources can be added for no or very little net incremental cost. Peak View Wind project modeling showed that the avoided costs associated with the conventional generation that was replaced by the wind resource were greater than the cost of the wind resource. So these are direct quotes out of the electric resource plan. Here's some of the financials, which showed that for 2 of the 3 wind farms, the avoided costs were greater than the capital construction costs. So there were incremental cost savings for 2 out of the 3. And then another point that comes right along with this is that that renewables provide price stabilization, which is an important argument because the counter-argument, the traditional counter-argument, is that the intermittency and the effectiveness rates of renewables are not predictable and they're low, and so you've got to build a lot more, and then you've got to be widely dispersed geographically in order to come anywhere close to providing the base load that coal or natural gas would produce. So to show rate stabilization through implementation of renewables was an important point in our argument because there's no fuel cost. That's the key. And that makes all the difference when you don't have to go to the Henry Hub natural gas price index and figure out what it's going to cost tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. All right, so after we made these points that essentially these analyses are real-world analyses, these changes are real, it's a revolution in industry parallel to another revolution that we've already witnessed in telecom. We then began to kind of amplify the arguments by pointing out that the community already had a strong interest, economic interest in renewable energy. And this is demonstrated all the way from the Comanche solar plant, which when it was constructed, it's right next to the coal plants, by the way. Isn't that a powerful image? Was the largest utility scale solar installation east of the Rockies, is the way it was built when it was constructed a couple years ago. And then we also have small businesses like Solar Roast Coffee that use solar energy in their business. And we, as I think probably most of you know, the Vestas Towers plant, wind tower plant is in Pueblo, largest wind tower manufacturing facility in the world. And so the Pueblo Economic Development Corporation had finally gotten themselves on board to realizing that the manufacturing sector in renewables was a viable economic development strategy for the community to take. We already had a fair amount of rooftop solar, 1,000 installations over 45,000 meters, which isn't a lot, but it's enough for the company to meet the renewable energy standard requirement of 2%. We talked about the solar potential in Pueblo and how many more structures were good candidates for rooftop solar installation, distributed solar installation. Generally talked about the benefits of distributed solar, which are not widely discussed in the investor-owned utility world. And so that needs our championship, it needs our advocacy to continually point that out. And then we laid out for them where the Ready for 100 program was at that point. 10 cities at that point, and a lot's happened since then. I think we'll probably get into a little bit of that in a little while. But this showed them the context that Pueblo could be involved in. And these are the cities that had declared at that point, with some quotes, including this interim city manager from Georgetown, Texas, which is a highly conservative community in the middle of the oil and gas world in Texas. We didn't do this to save the world. We did this to get a competitive rate and reduce the risk for our consumers. These are the arguments that sell in Pueblo, Colorado. And all of us are as absolutely concerned about the climate emergency as you are. But we built our case on economics, not on climate change. And this was the approach that has worked. Talked about the Ready for 100 campaign and the diversity of people that were involved in the campaign already. We have a city council champion who has progressively stepped up more and more as he's gotten excited about the whole Ready for 100 campaign. This is Larry Atencio, Councilman Atencio from Pueblo's east side, one of our barrios, and he has a big interest in the nexus of energy justice and renewables and how renewables can help reduce rates and provide better access to more reliable electricity for low-income people. And we did, of course, include the environmental message. But most importantly was about a new vision for an economically disadvantaged community that has had a difficult time over 150 years identifying its economic development strategies that work. And this new vision was rebranding Pueblo as not just the steel city, but the renewables city, and rebranding it around primarily manufacturing of renewables. And where this concept has taken hold, and we're growing that concept. The governor's on board, and so a lot of us are pushing this pretty hard, and it was definitely one of our selling points for the Ready for 100 campaign. And then we closed with this: the need for council leadership. Help us celebrate Pueblo's renewable energy achievements so far. Join us in leading our community toward greater energy efficiency. Using the city's LEDs, who was celebrating a big win. The city had made this decision on their own. Use the city's LED streetlights program as a model. Embrace the Pueblo County Sustainability Plan. Embrace the 2015 building codes. And declare a vision of 100% renewable energy for Pueblo's future, and join us in leading the way. Yay! And it worked. It took a while, but it worked. And maybe in the panel I can share a few developments about what's happened since then and where we're at with the accountability phase of the commitment. But it's brought us a lot of visibility, national press visibility, articles in Mother Jones and Grist, and I don't know if any of you caught the Public Radio International spot on The World day before yesterday that was on Pueblo. And so it's been a very exciting development. So I recommend it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, it's fine. How are you?
You hear me? There we go. So we're actually going to switch up just a little bit because we're running a little bit behind. We're going to take questions from the audience in a couple of minutes. One thing I just want to talk a little bit about before turning over to Don, talk a little bit about Jefferson County, is as David alluded to, there's several different phases of developing a campaign. And I realize, obviously, this is a CRES event. There's a lot of amazing, wonky talk about all these different rates and technologies. And I know a lot of us in the room probably are like, okay, this is great, numbers, science, math, great, what do I do? And that's okay. And so for us, when we look at how do we start new campaigns, we think about it in 4 different stages. The first stage is what we call community mapping, power mapping. So who are your decision makers? Who's your mayor? Who's your city council? What makes them tick? Who influences them? What power do we have? What groups are there already involved in the community? And how do we rally everyone together to create this shared vision? Then from that community mapping process, and once you have those conversations with groups throughout the community, then you get a better sense of, okay, how do we run with this? What's our strategy to get what we seek, which is ultimately this commitment? And that's when we build up to a launch. So tonight is a launch of the Jefferson County Ready for 100 movement. And this is about learning about what this campaign is all about. It's about plugging into your own local communities and building this movement. And then from tonight, building that momentum to get us to that finish line where we can actually get a commitment like we saw in Pueblo. But it doesn't stop there. Once we have that commitment and we do all that organizing, which is the third stage, the fourth stage is accountability. So now that we have a commitment, how do we make sure that this momentum continues? How do we make sure this is a just, equitable, and inclusive movement for everybody? So that's the vision of this movement, and that's what has been successful. And when we look at this, every single community that is making these commitments is putting in more and more pressure on the XCELs of the world, on the cooperatives of the world, like Tri-State, even municipal governments. This movement is growing, and whatever the pathway is, whether it's moving away from utility, embracing a relationship with utility, we know that every community is going to have a different pathway, and that's why really exploring those opportunities, that community mapping is the first step to find that path forward. And again, to make sure that we're inclusive. All of our communities have diverse people in them, and people that frankly don't look like a lot of white people in the room, which is predominantly this room. And so thinking about that, very cognizant of who is impacted, who's oftentimes on the front lines, the fence lines of these communities, breathing in that pollution, making sure that when we have issues of gentrification in our communities, as we have cleaner air and cleaner water and better transportation, that this is a vision for everybody to include and to be a part of. So with that, I want to pass this on to Don just to talk a little bit about Jefferson County, and then we're going to do a quick couple questions from the audience, but we really want to make sure everyone has a time to meet each other in the lobby. So we're going to do this for maybe about 10 more minutes, 15 minutes, and then we'll go from there. So Don Sorensen, everybody.
Wanted to talk about the Jefferson County initiative a little bit. It's been going on for almost a year. We got together just after last March and started pulling together a number of people to see what we could do to get teams launched in each of the cities. And so, okay, is that better? Yeah, there we go. Yeah, now I can even hear myself. Okay, so anyway, so we started down the road, and we got a number of different groups put together, and began our work. And last year, the progress was probably more about getting to know each other and getting some groups established. And now this year, hopefully, we can get several more teams going and more people on those teams. And so what I wanted to do is, I want to say one more thing. So what we have is sort of an umbrella activity that runs over the top of all these different city teams and the county teams. And then each of the teams work in their cities somewhat autonomously, because what we found or what we learned is the governments are all a little different, the personalities on the city councils and the mayors are a little different, and the challenges are changed. So we needed to have a personality or a rhythm for each of the different groups that was unique. So it's almost to the point where these groups are their own Ready for 100, or actually what we're using now is Jeffco is Ready for Renewables. Each of those teams run under their own flag to some degree, which gives them a certain amount of flexibility and personality. So that's all very good and actually works fairly well. So what I wanted to do was have each of the people that are leading the different towns stand up when I give your name, and they're going to be out in the commons area next to tables that have the names of the cities on top of the table. And if you're interested in participating in your particular city, certainly sign up, and they would love to meet you. And what we're going to try to do is have a follow-up meeting in each of the towns led by these individuals within the next week to 10 days, so that you can get to know each other and then understand more about what's going on. So Ann Sutton from Westminster, right here. Okay. Rachel Smallwood from Arvada, over here. Rob Robinson from Wheat Ridge. Rob's right here. Rob's on the Wheat Ridge Sustainability Council. Greg Hall from Golden, he's in the back. And Jamie Krutz. Is Jamie here tonight? I did not see him. Oh, there he is. There he is. Good, good, awesome. And I'm doing Lakewood for the time being, because I live in Lakewood. And then we need somebody for Jefferson County. And this would be the unincorporated portion of Jefferson County to help us lead that particular effort. That's been a gap in our work. So one last couple bits of announcements I want to make here. I want to call out a few other people. We have the opportunity tonight for you to meet some folks that are with some other organizations as well, besides the Sierra Club and CRES community. So I'd like to call Jan Rose. It should be in here someplace. Jan is very involved with legislative initiatives down at the Capitol. If that's your kind of thing and you'd like to do that more, she is certainly the person to talk to. She's also quite involved with Climate Reality, which is Al Gore's organization, and they're going to be doing a training coming up. So if that is something that you would like to do, be sure to find Jan after we're done here. Julia Williams, is Julia here? No, Julia's not here. Okay, she was with 350.org, and that's another organization. And then, let's see, Phil, you want to stand up? Phil is with Climate Reality, with Citizens Climate Lobby, and it's a very good organization, and we have a very active chapter here in Golden that's doing a lot of good things. So if you're interested in learning more, there's some brochures out there. And I guess, let's see, there are some displays out in the entry out here. There's a display on climate, and then there's which is very interesting, and a bunch of brochures in front of that. Be sure to take a look at it. Very informative. We also have an EV display, which should be, we encourage everybody to seriously consider looking or thinking about getting an EV. It's a huge impact from a personal climate or a personal emissions point of view. And I guess that's it. I think we can go on to the Q&A. Do we want to put chairs up here?
Yeah, I think we're just going to do this over the next 10 minutes, do a couple questions. That way everyone has some time to get in the lobby. So I'd love to invite all of our guests to come to the stage. And who in the audience has a question, and we can get rolling and do this for just a couple minutes. So we'll have a couple mics running around. So we'll start here and then go there.
Bob Wilson, live in Arvada, and I'm running for the RTD Board of Directors. Once again, I'd like to chat with you folks later about what's possible if I get elected as one director among 15 for the large electric transportation load that RTD presents.
Was that a question?
Yeah, was that a question or?
It's a request to call.
Okay, and we're just going to stick with questions right now. That way we can then have discussions after this section. So, any other questions? Okay, on the front.
I have a quick question for the lady from NREL. Can you advise me as to how I can find technical competence in developing a property with at least 3 forms of renewable energy nearby? You don't have to answer me right now. I'll be in the crowd.
Let's talk in the lobby.
And I'd like to ask, I believe it's Dick from Pueblo.
David,
pardon me. You mentioned all of these interests in solar, but you didn't tell us how much solar is there. Whenever I go to Pueblo, I've got to roll the windows down and the sun is shining brightly all the time except at night. Isn't there a lot of solar available in Pueblo compared to, say, Denver?
well, in regard to distributed generation, those 1,000 installations are that's the bulk of it. There's not a lot of mid-range solar at all. We have 2 small solar gardens and very little commercial solar. Now, I don't know the actual megawatt totals for the rooftop, the residential rooftop solar. And then in regard to utility scale, Black Hills has 2 small wind installations and 0 solar. So there is no utility scale solar energy being managed by that utility. The Comanche solar installation is 300 megawatts maybe?
It's 150, but I'm not
150?
sure. I'm not sure.
So that's large.
I wish those panels were on our roofs here, but we're also happy that it created jobs. So
And that, of course, doesn't serve Pueblo. It serves the northern part of the state.
But I do want to, I think your question is about the potential for solar in Pueblo.
Yeah.
And when NREL has mapped it, the San Luis Valley is sort of the best in the state, but then the next best starts in Pueblo, and it's kind of a triangle that goes southeast. So absolutely, Pueblo has amazing potential, and
So-
these folks
Yeah.
are doing great work.
That's
so.
my primary point.
Oh, okay, sorry. I misunderstood.
A definitional question. 100% renewable on the grid or on all energy use? And I've heard it with a ambiguous kind of thing. Aspen, yeah, we got 100% renewable committed. Electricity grid, nothing about transport, nothing about heating the houses. So what is this that the whole program is? Definition.
Let me suggest that Bryce respond to that first with what because the Sierra Club has a definite stance on this.
Yeah, and I might retool the question a little bit to get that. So for Sierra Club, our goal is to move cities and move the electricity sector to 100% renewable electricity by 2035. I believe by 2030, our goal is to reduce transportation emissions by 50%. And by 2050, have all energy sectors be renewable, so transportation, heating, and so on. And so let me add a question to this for this panel. When we talk about renewable electricity and renewable energy, could any of you speak to the nexus that provides in terms of, say, electric vehicles and then the electric grid and digging deep into other potential nexes?
Yeah.
Okay, we're obviously, I mean, we saw from the graph that electricity, and this is probably true for most communities, is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. We also know that technically it's possible to decarbonize a very high percentage of that electricity. Now that we have storage, we don't quite know where it is, but it's well way above 60%, but exactly where we haven't figured out yet. But obviously, then we also have to think about natural gas for heating, transportation fuels, and when Duncan showed the 4 boxes for Boulder, we have a plan that goes to all of that, as well as trying to get more carbon sequestered in soils. And it's just a big job, especially the heating part. But our community has kind of looked at when everybody's furnace comes up, because they looked at all the permits for the furnaces. And so they know when like this furnace is probably gonna, Joe's nodding his head because I think he understands it better than I do, but okay, so that's 10 years, so that someday that furnace is gonna go out. So Duncan is part of the effort to try to get people to kind of sign up and think ahead of time, because if your furnace goes out at, noon on Christmas Day, it's not the time to be thinking about your alternatives or your hot water heater. So to try to think about alternatives ahead of time and try to make sure that we're moving away from natural gas. Fracking's a huge issue in Boulder County and Boulder, and we want to, frankly, cut our ties as well as we can to all the fossil fuels. So there's a big old study that's been done in Boulder. It's on our climate page. If you kind of want to just go there and look for ideas or contact one of these guys who know how to reach us.
Bryce. Does this mic work? There we go. Hello. David, I wonder if you could help our audience understand how the extra importance that solar could have for Pueblo, because from my understanding, Black Hills Energy has been an unreliable partner, and their solar program has been on again and off again. And that's posed problems for solar installers. There's a big demand for solar in Pueblo, and so can you tell us a little, paint that picture, and tell us why your municipalization efforts are even more important? Thank you.
Well, briefly, in the early 2000s, the Black Hills Energy established a rebate program for rooftop solar, and it was a very generous program. And they, by doing that, there we go. By doing that, they engendered a small industry, rooftop installer solar installer industry with a dozen or so companies that were formed, and then the company overspent the RESA, so the Renewable Energy Standard account, that is that 2% or whatever it is that comes, that's a surcharge on all our bills, goes into a fund to support the development of renewable energy. They overspent that account, it went into the red, and they canceled the rebate program cold turkey all at once. And all but 2 of those businesses went out of business, and it's completely stalled out the distributed generation industry, and actually that's for the whole region, for all of southeast Colorado. So again, briefly, the implications of that for municipalization, or at least for finding another another form of utility that would be a better community partnership, are to be able to have some input into those kinds of decisions. So even if we had a co-op with elected co-op members, but I think what our favorite alternative at this point is a municipal utility. And so we're at the point of doing a feasibility study now, the Pueblo Electric Utility Commission, doing a feasibility study to examine what some of these other alternatives are. But one of the reasons was because of the way they shut down the distributed generation industry without any public input or community involvement.
It's been tragic.
Hi. I guess it's not. Hi. I have a loud voice. I can probably talk without this mic. I have a question for the panel as a whole. It's related to both battery storage and solar. Last month, we announced a 30% tariff on solar panels coming into the United States, and I believe that somewhere ahead of 75% of our panels are now produced overseas. Secondly, today we should have passed the residential battery storage bill, which will endorse and support residential battery storage for all of us, and I think that's going to affect our grid plans. And today also we should have dropped a bill endorsing utility level storage so that things like the Comanche proposal and future wind and solar projects can include a state endorsed battery component. So my question to all 4 of you is, what do you see the impact of the solar tariffs being, if any, and what do you see the impact of both residential and utility battery storage support at the state level being, in terms of moving our goals forward? Thanks.
Yeah, go right ahead. I'm certainly not an expert on the tariff, so if you have thoughts.
I will jump in. Obviously, the tariff is an issue for sure, and the solar industry certainly. I just won't go there. I'm just not going to say it. It was not a very thoughtful decision. Let's just say. I think XCEL has asked that all the bids get refreshed. That means we'll get a real data point in terms of what the tariff did. The tax bill probably also kind of was favorable towards solar. So there'd be sort of an offset, and we're not quite sure where it is. It's definitely an issue. I'm just biting my tongue for reasons you probably understand. But it's not going to change the bottom line, which is that solar is really affordable now, and solar with storage is really affordable. That's just a huge, huge breakthrough. So I'm just super excited, but I think we're kind of constrained because, as I said, XCEL has spent a lot of money on fossil fuel infrastructure, so they don't have much of an appetite. They don't have a lot of experience at modeling with storage. They don't quite know how they're going to do it, and since they don't really want to do it anyways, you kind of know what happens when you don't really want to do something. You don't do it. So that's why these messages to the board of directors, I think, are going to be really, really important. But we're in a completely new regime. It's so exciting. And again, thanks to NREL and all the people that have worked so hard to drive the price of these technologies down. We've never had 20,000 megawatts of storage projects ready to go in Colorado. That is a massive game changer. XCEL doesn't quite know what to do with it, so pick up one of these if you can to force them to kind of figure out what needs to be done. But I'm a little worried about the tariff, but not terribly. We'll get the new bid prices in about another 6-7 weeks, something like that. But I don't expect it to be a massive change. Might be change a little bit, but still the lowest cost ones are still going to be fabulous.
So I'm going to go ahead and encourage us to continue this dialogue in the lobby since it's 8:30. We're a little bit behind. There is one last thing that we wanted to do since we wanted to thank our panelists for their participation. I'm going to hand it over to Don.
This evening, these folks have done Colorado a tremendous amount of good, and we wanted to recognize that and recognize the effort that coming all the way up from Pueblo and coming all the way down from Boulder to talk to us and coming over from NREL. We really appreciate this. So we have some really cool gifts for these guys, and we want to present them to it. It's an ecosystem in a small glass container with life that keeps going for years. This is really cool. So stand by here.
So, Don, actually, you probably explain better, but so I know that it's within the ecosystem. There's a little shrimp in there, and it's like its own enclosed biome. So it's really neat. So, just one last time, let's give a round of applause for everyone for their participation. And there are stands with that over here, so we can carefully put those back. So again, thank you everybody for your time tonight. The dialogue will continue. Again, as Don pointed out, there's some amazing leaders in the room today that are eager to talk with you about opportunities to engage locally. So head out. There's, I believe, some snacks and drinks and stuff. So again, thank you all very much.